Here's a template that I hope you've written for processing a maybe posit. This is based on the data definition for maybe posit. Because the data definition says one of, we have to use count to distinguish between the two cases. In the first case, the maybe posit is a non-structure which has no fields, so all we have to do is to leave the answer part of the count case blank. In the second case, it turns out that the maybe posit is actually a posit. So remember that a posit is a structure with two fields, an x and a y. So we have to take these two fields out using selectors, posit x and posit y. Also remember that these fields contain numbers which are relatively simple. So we're done. We don't need to further process these numbers in the template. We just need to remind ourselves in the template that, hey, if we have a posit, then we can use the x and y coordinates in some way in the function definition. So that's it for maybe posit. What about for world? Well, let's take a look. The data definition for a world does not say one of. There's only one kind of world. So the template that I hope you've written for processing a world does not have count. What it does need to do is to take out the three fields of a world. It needs to use world invaders, world player, and world bullet to take out those three fields. Let's look at what kind of things are contained in these three fields. The world invaders field is a list of posits, which is a pretty complicated piece of data. So we're going to use process list of posits to further process it. Process list of posits is a template that we wrote earlier for processing a list of posits. That's the first field, world invaders. The second field, the player field, is just a number. So that's simple enough to not require further processing in the template. Finally, the bullet field is a maybe posit, which is a union. That's pretty complicated. So we're going to use process maybe posit in the template to remind ourselves that whenever we process a world, if we need to do anything to the bullet part of the world, we probably need a function separate for processing that bullet field. And that function can probably be written using the process maybe posit template. Okay, now we are ready to write some functions that actually act on these worlds. As before, we need at least two functions, one for drawing a world and one for deciding what the next world should be. So let's look at, for example, draw world, a function that will take a world that contains an invader, a player, and a bullet, and return an image. So it should draw the world as an image. Okay, we can write a header for this function, naming the input w. Let's write some examples for this function. When we write examples for the function, we can use the examples of worlds that we've defined before. So here, instead of making up a new random example world on the spot, I could just use w1. So the question we have to answer in this step 3 of the design recipe is, how are we going to draw w1? We already know how to draw the invaders, that's ps2. But then we need to also draw the player. We don't need to draw the bullet because there's no bullet. B1 is no bullet. Okay, so we need to draw the player. And we could draw the player on top of the invaders by using place image and passing the result of draw invaders as the image that place image should draw on. So the idea is, it would be nice to have something called player sprite, whatever that is, and then we're going to put player sprite at a location on top of draw invaders ps2 using the x coordinate 80, and the y coordinate should be at the bottom of the screen. So remember that the background image is 300 tall, so maybe 295 would be a reasonable place to put the player. So those are our 4 required inputs to the place image function from the image library. And now we need to define player sprite for this example to really make sense. So I'm just going to quickly make a triangle. If you like, you could certainly draw something more complicated. But let's just use a triangle for now. Let's say it's a solid red triangle. So that's one example. When we design a function and write function examples, it's important to write examples for all kinds of inputs. Here we have not even decided how to draw a bullet because we only have written an example for a world where there is no bullet. That's one reason to write another example, maybe for W2, where there is a bullet because B2 is actually a posin. Let's do that. We could draw the player and the invaders in the same way as before. The player is now in a different x coordinate, so we're going to use 100 here, still 295 at the bottom of the screen. We're going to draw the invaders in PS1, so I'm going to put PS1 here. But now we also need to draw a bullet. So the bullet is B2. What's B2? It's 7050. So we're assuming that there's a bullet in this world W2 at 7050. So we need to draw a bullet there. Okay. So again, we could use the result of previous drawing to put more stuff on that. So this result of place image already has the invaders and the player on it. And to add the bullet, we could use place image, but we would pass the previous result of place image in a chain as the 4th input to this outer call to place image. This time we're going to need a bullet sprite. We haven't defined that yet. We'll do that in a minute. And we're going to put it at, what is it again? 7050? That's a bullet location? Yes, 7050. So now, for this to make sense, we just need to define bullet sprite. Let's use the circle this time, perhaps. Maybe a circle that's solid green. Now, frankly, these examples use outputs that are images and that are fairly intricate. We could have worked out these example expected outputs in a separate tab, and that might have been a good idea just to make sure that these expressions make sense before putting them back in our main program with all the other complications going on around these check expect expressions. But anyway, that's our draw world function design recipe steps 1 through 3. We have the data definitions written. Here are the signature, purpose, and header. And here are 2 examples which cover both a world with a bullet and a world without a bullet. Now we could use the template we have already written to write this function. So I'm going to copy this template and I'm going to rename process world, the name of the template, to draw world, the name of the function we're actually designing. Now W could be W1 or it could be W2 or some other world. And in each case, we're going to have 3 fields to use inside W. For example, if W were W1, then the invaders field would be PS2. So when the template suggests that we process a list of posins, a reasonable thing to do would be to use the draw invaders function to do that processing. Similarly, we already have the player. That's a number like 80 or 100. So the examples already suggest that we use place image like here and here to put the player sprite on top of the result of draw invaders, which is produced by draw invaders PS2 or draw invaders PS1 in the examples. So already we can start to fill in the template using what has been suggested. We have an image here, the result of draw invaders. We have a number here, the result of world player. So we could use place image to put the player sprite at the player x coordinate 295, that's constant in the examples, and the image that results from drawing just the invaders. So already we have written an expression following the template that draws both the invaders and the player. So the formula here produces the image here or the image here. Now we just need to deal with the bullet. Well, if there's no bullet, then we're done. This is the expected output. If there is a bullet, we do need to put the bullet sprite on this image. The template suggests that we are going to need a helper function to process the bullet because there are two kinds of bullets. And we are going to need to distinguish whether there is a bullet or not and do different things depending on that. And that is a little too much for the function we're working on. We should follow the template's advice. The template suggests that we use a separate function, that we design a separate function for processing that bullet. So that function would take the bullet, that's a maybe posin, and the image to draw on in order to produce the final result, like this or this image. So instead of calling that function process maybe posin, a more informative name for that function that we have yet to design would be draw bullet. And we're going to draw bullet with both the bullet and the image that is to be drawn on. It would be nice to have this draw bullet function. We wish that we could have a draw bullet function.
The other day, I had a whoosh sandwich. Well, a whoosh sandwich is the kind of a sandwich where you have 2 slices of bread and you wish you had some meat. Ball, ball, ball.
We wish that we could have a draw bullet function that takes a maybe posin and an image and return an image. This should draw the bullet on the given image. The given image is this one, which is the image to draw on. Let's write this header. Let's clarify what we mean by writing examples for this new function. It turns out that when we make a wish for a function to exist, for example, just now we are wishing for draw bullet to exist, our wish comes usually from examples of the function that would use this new function. We want draw world to use draw bullet, so the examples we've already written for draw world lead to examples for draw bullet. Here's how that works. We want draw world W1 to produce this image. Well, if we follow the definition we have written for draw world, we are going to want draw bullet, when it's presented with no bullet, to just keep the image that it is given. So if we draw B1, which is none, no bullet, on top of this image, which has a player and some invaders on it, we expect to just get the same image back. That's an example for draw bullet. Here's a second case from the second example we've written for draw world. Here, we are drawing W2 and we want to get this out. But the image we have after drawing the sprite for player and for the invaders is this image. So if we pass this image, which only has a player and the invaders, to draw bullet, we want draw bullet to add the bullet sprite. That means that when draw bullet gets this input, it should finish the drawing by adding a bullet sprite on top. So these two examples that we have written for draw bullet come directly from the examples we have written for draw world and the way we want to use draw bullet to define draw world. So without doing much work, we have already finished design recipe steps 1 through 3 for draw bullet. We've written the signature, purpose, and header by making a wish from draw world. We have used the examples from draw world to derive the examples for draw bullet. And now we need a template, but we have already written the template earlier. You have written the template for processing a maybe posin. So I'm just going to copy that and rename process maybe posin to draw bullet. Also, we need to add this new input image, which is the second input not being processed but passed to draw bullet. I'm going to put the new input and remind myself that this new input might well be useful in each of the two count cases. Now I ask you to fill in the template using the two examples.